Chapter 3. Part 4.
They left Vale Nevodo following the course of the Nevodo River, crossed through the bridge of the Sleeping Troll and continued west. The days passed through the territories between the border of Valdair and the Confederacy. It had been a long time since wars were only narratives for winter nights. Since the truce with the dragons, nothing remarkable had happened in this area of Eud except the War of the Onions. The people lived quietly. Although the Confederacy had hardly any large populations in the interior, everyone lived by the sea, where the climate was milder and the sea provided abundant food. They reached the mouth of the Nevodo River and followed the coast southward. The coast was full of small fishing villages where they could get water and find a roof over their heads. The sea disappeared halfway to Fisbanil, the road between the Nevodo River and the Bista River headed inland. They found themselves with a few days of total solitude, in an uninhabited area. At last they came to a crossroads, and Agnoruk chose to spend the night beside some huge stones. Better to camp here, these stones are a good shelter. They made a fire and had dinner, Agnoruk as always drinking tea in the twilight. Here the southern road forks in two directions, south towards Fisbanil or inland towards the Shadow Ruins. Arian got up and looked at the horizon. Deep in the background there were black silhouettes that reminded him of the Towers of Oblivion. Yes, these were much more threatening. "It's been a long time since I've been here," commented the half-orc. "Since when?" "In the ruins of Shadows, is where my father died." "I thought I had died far from home." Agnoruk smiled bitterly. He didn't like to talk about it. No, ironically he and our entire group died only 12 days' march from Vale Nevodo. "Let's go the long way. The ruins of the Shadows are not far from Snowy Valley if you go the inland way." "What happened?" "It was a simple mission, nothing special. After some attacks by Zirak in the south, some merchants asked us to finish them off, threatening some mines of their property. We were in Vale Nevodo spending the winter doing nothing, and in exchange they offered us an appetizing amount of gold that we did not need. I was opposed to going. I never liked the area. But he did not have the right to vote as he was the youngest, and for the others it was an excellent opportunity to win more gold with little risk. They seemed to be right since it was easy to finish off the Zirak. I remember how they messed with me for my refusal. They even threatened to take my part for ashes. Unfortunately, my instinct is not usually wrong. When we were returning to Vale Nevodo, we were attacked by a group of Baloras. They didn't give us any choice. The whole group was massacred. Thanks to Emelian's sacrifice I saved my life. Desolate, I survived in the swamps of Tarum. Then I followed the trail of the Baloras. They camped north of the ruins." The half-orc's gaze was cold. "What did you do, Agnoruk?" Arian asked. "I studied their guard patterns, and one moonless night I infiltrated their camp." "No." Arian knew what the half-orc's words implied, since there were not only warriors in the camp. Arian knew that Agnoruk bore death by the hand of his divine mother, and if he wanted he could use that talent to cause terrible devastation. It was the first time he had acknowledged having used it. Anthera didn't seem to understand the gravity of Agnoruk's confession. Kush and Vanus were keeping silent. They weren't really surprised that he was able to do it out of revenge, to cause a massacre. They all died quickly without suffering. I let their leader sleep. When he woke up, he discovered that all of his people were dead. He went crazy and I finished him off. Then I set fire to the camp, but first I discovered a letter among the leader's belongings. He had not destroyed it. Although the Baloras do not know how to read, he would surely have the letter as a guarantee of payment for fulfilling his part. A letter. It was given to him by some merchants from Fisbanil, the same ones who contacted our group. That company of merchants died in an unfortunate accident shortly after the Baloras' camp was set on fire. Although rare, the Baloras can deal with the boldest and least scrupulous inhabitants of the Confederacy. The letter was from a prince of Olbiana offering a large amount of gold as a reward for the death of a group of adventurers who would soon be heading to the ruins of the Shadows. "How?" Arion was surprised by Agnoruk's confession. Prince Serbal of Olbiana, second in line to the throne, was madly in love with Byanak, the king of the vampires, who I had killed a year before. The half-orc bit his lower lip as he drank some of his tea. As revenge, he pulled all his strings to finish me off. My greatest feat resulted in the death of all my friends and my father. After finishing off the Belauras, I didn't return to Vale Nevodo, so they would think I was dead too. I went west, towards the kingdom of Vantaroa. I got enough gold to take a merchant ship bound for Olbiana to end my revenge. Prince Serbal. Kush was consulting his book. He died, a hill devoured him while he was bathing. Kush looked up, it was a painful death. The magician imagined the terrible thousand-legged worm devouring the prince's entrails. He died suffering terrible agony. One had to be very skilled to kill a prince of Olbiana inside the royal palace. Agnoruk must have very good contacts in Olbiana, the wizard reasoned as he listened to the rest of the half-orc's narration. Then I stumbled. I returned briefly to Vale Nevodo but left. For a while I wandered aimlessly, ending up in the north of Darsuk, getting into a lot of trouble until I was recruited by the company of the Blue Phoenix. You left because of that? Arion understood the half-orc. After a great triumph always comes a great misfortune. And I don't want death to accompany his revenge. With that dark thought, they fell asleep while Agnoruk performed the first shift on duty. He spent hours looking at that blur on the horizon that was the ruins of the shadows. The rest of the days of travel passed with a pleasant monotony. The southern part of the Confederation was the most important area. Populated the territory, and after 5 days they finally came to see its most populous city, Fizbanil. Built on the Cape of the Lost of Samael. Along with Myriat, it was the most important port in all of Eute, but Fizbanil, due to its privileged location, used to be an obligatory stop for many merchant ships. They crossed the bridge that crossed the river with the same name, its mouth originating a pleasant delta with gentle currents where the great city was located. The capital of the Confederacy of Ostinia, although it was not as extensive a city as Tame or Olbiana, its walls had nothing to envy to those of these two great cities. What stood out about Fizbanil was that he had a very lively life. Those were good times. Eute had been without conflicts worth mentioning for a long time, and trade with other continents for their rich raw materials was beginning to be a good source of income for the Confederation. Agnoruk had not visited Fizbanil for a long time and found it quite changed. The Senate of the Confederation had carried out a series of reforms in the city to provide it above all with a much larger, better communicated and functional market. Many things could change in Fizbanil, but what no one from the Senate would dare to demolish, although they would surely not lack desire, was the Tower of Princess Asnamasli, the building that reigned in the sky of Fizbanil, and which could rival in height the towers of Tripulia. The Great Tower was abandoned to its fate because it was cursed. No one knew for sure the reason for its misfortune. In Fizbanil there were many rumors and legends on the subject, but what was clear is that no one in their right mind wanted to be inside its walls. The district where the tower was located was only inhabited by the outcasts who had nowhere else to live. So the city center was abandoned to its fate with a huge wall that isolated the tower and its neighborhood from the rest of the city. They surrounded the neighborhood of the Great Tower. In the market they looked for a good inn to spend the night, before returning the mounts to the stable where they belonged in exchange for a sum of gold not as high as what it had cost them to acquire them previously. An old acquaintance, Captain Labres, was waiting for them at the inn, and his ship was ready to set sail the next morning. The sailor greeted Agnoruk effusively. They knew each other well. During the previous decade they had used Labres' services on some of his trips with Gosberg. His vessel of elf origin was one of the fastest in all of Sharnaries. Agnoruk said goodbye to his home, EU, the farthest continent of all those in northern Sharnaries and where dragons still lived with men. A continent that together with his father he had traveled from north to south. When he was a wacky young man and bully, and before he set sail with his group of mercenaries to the rich kingdoms of Darsuk in search of fortune. Without any mishap they set sail from Fisbanil to sail the ocean of Hyolau. They would then follow the traditional route through the Belinton Sea. They would make a stop at Olbiana to resupply. Surely they would sight Turkheimak and then cross the Strait of Sirapan. Later they had to cross the Ocean of Eternity following a northerly course until they reached their destination, Almera. It was a long journey, but thanks to the speed of Labra's ship it was done in the shortest possible time. The ship named Cordelia, in honor of the captain's mother. It was an open secret that Gosberg was involved in Labra's father obtaining the ship, but the sailor was very reserved when it came to telling the story of how an excellent elf ship ended up being owned by his father. All they knew was that it had happened a long time ago. Without many details, a fortnight after leaving Olbiana and thanks to very favorable currents and winds, they saw the unmistakable and extensive beaches of Enholis that made them see that they were reaching their destination, Almera, the city of the mercenaries.